Israeli TV has been reporting that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu favoured a complete military takeover of Gaza during yesterday's strategy meeting with senior security officials. Israeli tanks pushed into central Gaza yesterday, and Gaza's health ministry reported that 8 more people died of starvation or malnutrition, with at least 80 people killed in the most recent Israeli firing. But US President Donald Trump said that further occupation of Gaza would be pretty much up to Israel.
One always has to remember that Trump has almost a bedrock of support from evangelical Christians, particularly the Christian Zionists, who number in the tens of millions. And that is one of the factors which makes him still very strong in support for Israel. But that is changing. And of course, it's changing in so much of the rest of the world. The situation is becoming so horrific in Gaza that, Israel is now seen to something like a pariah, a kind of rogue state. And that looks like it's going to be lasting a long time. You have this extraordinary situation of Netanyahu wanting to sort of go into Gaza fully with the armed forces right throughout the country to garrison the whole of Gaza. And many in the military think this is actually impossible to do, because the reality is that Hamas is still there. It probably now has as much support in terms of actually people willing to die for their cause as it had 2 years ago. So it has not been defeated in the conventional sense, even though Gaza has been so wrecked. But Netanyahu doesn't see it this way, but more and more in the military do. And that, I think, is one weak area as far as Netanyahu is concerned.
Now, how powerful is the military? I mean, how likely are the generals, whoever they may be, to stand up to Netanyahu and say enough is enough? I know that there have been the letter sent to Donald Trump by ex-members of Shin Bet, of Mossad and the IDF, as well as political figures, saying, please put pressure on Netanyahu to stop.
That, I think, is very significant, but whether it's enough, I mean, essentially, Netanyahu so far has not budged, but there has been a postponement of a key cabinet meeting, and that suggests that the pressure is growing on him. One does have to remember that in Israel you have what is essentially a citizens' army. A very large proportion of the armed forces, particularly the ground troops, are actually reservists, and they'll be called up for relatively short periods of time, because longer periods it will affect the whole workings of the Israeli economy. So if Netanyahu was to get his way, and you were going to get the sort of the full garrisoning of the whole of Gaza, then the costs would be considerable. There would be more Israeli forces killed, and you will get a mood right across the country of why are we doing this? One has to remember that the basic way in which Israel in the past has tended to handle insurgencies is to use massive force against the civilian infrastructure to actually undermine support for the insurgents. The Tahrir Doctrine, as it's called. And they've been doing that in Gaza to an extraordinary extent. But the astonishing thing is, Hamas has not been defeated, and it's in a position where it could still cause problems. In many ways, probably some of the Hamas strategists would want to see this new policy, because they would then be able to engage more or less directly with the Israeli Defense Forces, even if their own position, their lack of weapons and the rest, is low. They would think they were at an advantage, but that is not the way Netanyahu sees it.
Now, we know that Israel buys weapons, but also is given weapons and aid by the United States of America. But it's a relatively small population. What is it, about 10 million people in total? They're preoccupied, obviously, with Gaza at the moment, but they also have their difficulties on the West Bank. The settlers, of course, are doing some of the heavy lifting for the IDF there. But they've got the Golan Heights in Syria. They've got Iran always on the horizon. They've got Houthis to worry about. And this is the state of siege that they see themselves in. But also, they must be stretched militarily.
They are stretched militarily, mostly on the ground. I mean, the whole situation, one has to remember that Israel has been a military-type society right from the start, from 1948 onwards, even before 1948, from the Haganah and the rest. So you're actually in a situation where Israel is used to this kind of thing, and you go through all the different wars. They've been really wars of either expansion or control, and that is the way that Israel works. It gets a lot of support from abroad, from the United States in particular, billions of dollars a year, particularly at this time of war. They seem to be able to cope with this as long as you have the support from the outside. One has to say that if the United States was not so supportive of Israel, then Israel would be in very big difficulty almost from day one. But that is where we are. And this is why, if there is any change in the United States, it does make a difference. But for the moment, the Israelis believe their support in the US is sufficient. It is much more what you were saying earlier on, whether the support is actually going to change within Israel itself. And that, I think, is the one to watch. Some analysts actually believe that what Netanyahu is about at the moment is giving the impression that he would go in big, mainly to keep the far-right elements in his coalition on side, even if there would be long delays in actually implementing any new policy. So it's a messy business, but that's really the crux, is whether there will be a change within Israel itself. The signs are there to some extent, but then we know from opinion polling, probably at present, the majority of Jewish Israelis would actually want to see Gaza just cleared of all its population as a means of ending the problem. And that is not going to happen.